There's a city in America that doesn't feel American, a place where English is optional, where the skyline is built with foreign money, and where the future is both golden and sinking. This is Miami, and it stands alone. Most American cities grew from the inside out. They were founded by settlers, built by industry, shaped by waves of internal migration. But Miami was invented. It barely existed a century ago. What is now a sprawling metropolis of nearly 7 million people was once mosquito-infested swampland that no one wanted. The city didn't emerge naturally. It was carved, drained, and sculpted from the Everglades by dreamers and developers who saw fortune where others saw only water and heat. And that origin story matters, because Miami never had time to develop the deep-rooted American identity that defines cities like Boston, Chicago, or San Francisco. It never had generations of families building traditions, establishing institutions, or creating a cohesive cultural narrative. Instead, Miami became something else entirely. A blank canvas. A city perpetually reinventing itself. A place where the American dream collides with Latin American ambition, Caribbean rhythm, and European capital. Walk through the streets of Coral Gables or Little Havana, and you'll hear something unusual for an American city. Spanish isn't just common. It's dominant. It's a language of business, of politics, of daily life. In Miami, over 70% of residents speak a language other than English at home. Spanish is the primary language for more than half the population. This is a neighborhood phenomenon or an ethnic enclave. This is citywide linguistic reality. In most American cities, immigrants eventually assimilate linguistically. The second generation speaks English fluently. The third generation might not speak the heritage language at all. But Miami breaks this pattern completely. Here, speaking Spanish isn't a disadvantage. It's often an advantage. You can build a successful business, raise a family, and live your entire life in Miami without ever becoming fluent in English. This creates something unprecedented in American urban life, a major metropolitan area where American identity is secondary to a transnational, multilingual, and fundamentally Latin American cultural framework. The numbers tell a striking story. Nearly 70% of Miami's population is Hispanic or Latino. But these aren't just statistics. They represent a complete inversion of the typical American immigration narrative. In other cities, immigrants arrive and gradually adopt American customs, American values, American ways of life. In Miami, the immigrants didn't assimilate into American culture. They recreated their own. Cuban exiles didn't just settle in Miami. They transformed it. They brought their politics, their cuisine, their music, their business practices, and their entire worldview. And because they came in such concentrated numbers, they didn't need to change. Miami changed instead. This began in earnest after the Cuban Revolution of 1959. When Fidel Castro took power, waves of Cuban exiles fled to the closest American city. They arrived with education, with business experience, with professional networks, and with an unshakable determination never to return until Castro fell. They weren't looking for a temporary refuge. They were building a new capital for Cuban identity in exile. Little Havana became more than a neighborhood. It became a political and cultural stronghold. Spanish-language media flourished. Banks catered to Latin American clients. The entire infrastructure of the city reoriented toward a bilingual, bicultural reality. But Miami's Latin American character goes far beyond Cuba. Venezuelans fleeing political instability. Colombians seeking economic opportunity. Brazilians investing in real estate. Argentinians escaping financial crises. Nicaraguans, Hondurans, Peruvians, Mexicans. Every crisis in Latin America sends another wave to Miami, and each wave reinforces the city's position as the unofficial capital of Latin America in the United States. Miami isn't just demographically Latin. It's psychologically, economically, and politically oriented southward rather than northward. This creates a profound sense of difference. In New York, Los Angeles, or Houston, Latin American immigrants are minorities navigating a predominantly Anglo-American culture. In Miami, Anglo-Americans are often the ones adjusting. Whites make up less than 15% of Miami-Dade County's population. For many residents, Miami doesn't feel like America. It feels like a Latin American city, that happens to use American currency and operates under American law, the cultural gravity pulls south, not north. The reference points are Bogota, Caracas, Sao Paulo, and Buenos Aires, not Chicago, Philadelphia, or Atlanta. And this brings us to one of Miami's most striking contradictions. Despite being one of America's most expensive cities, it has some of the lowest wages in the country. The median household income in Miami is dramatically below the national average. Yet the cost of living, especially housing, rivals or exceeds cities like Boston and Seattle. How does this work? How do people survive in a city where rent for a modest apartment can consume 60% of the average income? The answer reveals Miami's true nature. Miami isn't really one economy. It's two economies occupying the same space. There's a visible economy of service workers, retail employees, hospitality staff, and construction laborers. These are the people who keep the city running. They serve the drinks, clean the hotels, drive the Ubers, and build the towers. And they struggle. Many work multiple jobs. Many live far from the urban core, commuting hours each day. Many send money back to family in other countries, further stretching already thin resources. Then there's the invisible economy, the economy of foreign capital, offshore wealth, international real estate investment, and transnational business deals. This is the economy that builds the gleaming condos on Brickell Avenue and the waterfront mansions on Star Island. This is the economy that fills the luxury car dealerships and private schools. And this economy operates on a completely different scale. For wealthy Latin Americans, Russians, Europeans, and increasingly Asians, Miami offers something irresistible. A stable, sophisticated American city with a Latin soul, favorable tax treatment, and proximity to their home countries. Miami has become a haven for international wealth precisely because it doesn't feel too American. You can live in Miami and maintain your cultural identity, speak your language, eat your food, and do business with people from your country, all while enjoying American legal protections, property rights, and banking systems. For affluent foreigners, it's the best of both worlds. For working-class Miami residents, it means competing for housing with buyers who have international fortunes and no mortgage dependency. The result is a housing market completely detached from local wages. Condos sell for millions to buyers who may visit a few weeks a year. Entire buildings function as vertical safety deposit boxes for foreign capital. Meanwhile, teachers, nurses, and police officers can barely afford to live in the city they serve. This isn't gentrification in the traditional sense. It's something more extreme. It's an entire city being priced beyond the reach of its own workforce by an influx of global money seeking security and lifestyle in an increasingly unstable world. And yet, people stay. They endure the impossible economics because Miami offers something intangible: a tropical climate, a vibrant cultural scene, the possibility, however slim, of catching a wave of opportunity. And for immigrants especially, Miami represents access to the American system without requiring them to abandon their identity. It's a compromise city, a hybrid city, a place where you can be Venezuelan and American, Colombian and American, Brazilian and American without having to choose. But Miami's greatest contradiction isn't economic or cultural. It's environmental. This is a city built on borrowed time. Miami sits at an average elevation of just 6 feet above sea level. Large portions of Miami Beach are even lower, and the water is rising. Not theoretically, not in some distant future. Right now, sea levels in South Florida have risen about 8 inches since the 1950s. That might not sound catastrophic, but in a city this flat, every inch matters. Miami already experiences regular sunny day flooding. When high tides align with certain weather patterns, seawater simply bubbles up to the porous limestone bedrock beneath the city. Storm drains designed to carry water away from streets instead become fountains pushing water up into neighborhoods. This isn't a drainage problem that can be solved with better engineering. This is geology. The very foundation of Miami is porous stone. You can't build walls to keep the ocean out because the ocean is coming up from below. Scientists project that sea level could rise another 1 to 3 feet by the end of the century. Under some scenarios, parts of Miami could see 5 or 6 feet of rise. At that point, significant portions of the city become uninhabitable, not from a single catastrophic storm, but from the slow, relentless advance of salt water into the water table, into the foundation of buildings, into the electrical systems and transportation networks that make urban life possible. And yet, Miami keeps building. Cranes dominate the skyline. New luxury towers rise along the waterfront. Property values in flood-prone areas continue to climb. There's a collective agreement not to acknowledge the obvious. Developers keep developing. Buyers keep buying. Banks keep lending. Insurance companies keep insuring, though with increasing reluctance and skyrocketing premiums. It's as if the entire city has decided that the present is too profitable to worry about the future. This creates a strange temporal dissonance. Miami is simultaneously booming and doomed. It's experiencing an economic and cultural renaissance while sitting on one of the most vulnerable pieces of real estate in the developed world. Other coastal cities face climate risks, but few combine Miami's extreme exposure with its explosive growth. It's building toward a future that climate science suggests won't exist, or at least won't exist in a form recognizable to today's residents and investors. The psychology of this is fascinating. Miami operates on a kind of collective optimism that borders on denial. Perhaps it's the influence of Miami's immigrant population, people who have already taken enormous risks to build new lives. Perhaps it's the nature of the real estate and development industries that drive the local economy. Perhaps it's simply the human tendency to prioritize immediate gains over distant threats. Whatever the reason, Miami has become a case study in how cities respond to existential environmental challenges. And the response so far has been to build faster and worry later. Then there's Miami's political culture, which is unlike anywhere else in America. In most U.S. cities, local politics revolve around issues of housing, education, infrastructure, and economic development. In Miami, foreign policy is local policy. The politics of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other Latin American countries dominate political discourse in ways that would seem bizarre in Des Moines or Detroit. Candidates for city commission take positions on sanctions against foreign governments. The mayor of Miami meets with international leaders and weighs in on diplomatic issues usually reserved for the State Department. This happens because Miami's population has direct, immediate connections to political events throughout Latin America. When there's a presidential election in Venezuela, it matters in Miami because hundreds of thousands of Miami residents have family affected by the outcome. When U.S. policy toward Cuba shifts, it's not an abstract foreign policy question. It's personal. Miami is the only American city where foreign policy is genuinely local politics. This creates a unique political alignment. Miami-Dade County is one of the most politically diverse places in America. It's a purple county in a purple state, but not in the typical sense. You have conservative Cuban exiles who vote Republican primarily on foreign policy grounds. You have progressive young Latinos who lean left on social issues. You have Haitian and Caribbean communities with their own political concerns. You have wealthy foreigners with no voting rights, but significant economic influence. The result is a political landscape that doesn't map neatly onto traditional American left-right divides. Miami also has a relationship with corruption and institutional dysfunction that feels more Latin American than traditionally American. Public officials have been convicted of bribery, fraud, and money laundering with depressing regularity. Development deals often involve tangled webs of offshore companies and murky financial arrangements. This isn't unique to Miami, of course. Corruption exists everywhere. But in Miami, there's a certain acceptance of it, a shrug that says this is how things work. It's part of the Latin American political culture that Miami has absorbed along with the language and food. And then there's the question of identity itself. Who are Miamians? What defines them? In Boston, you're an American who happens to live in Boston. In Miami, national identity is more complicated. Many residents identify first with their country of origin, second as Miamians, and only distantly, if at all, as Americans. The city functions as a transnational space where national borders matter less than cultural and linguistic connections. This makes Miami feel global in a way that other American cities, even other major immigrant destinations, do not. Los Angeles has massive immigrant populations, but it still feels fundamentally American. New York is diverse beyond measure, but American identity provides a unifying framework. Miami lacks that framework, or rather, it has replaced it with something else. A pan-Latin American identity that transcends individual nationalities. A cosmopolitan culture rooted in Spanish language, tropical geography, and transnational economic networks. Young people growing up in Miami often speak 3 languages: English, Spanish, and a hybrid dialect called Spanglish that seamlessly blends both. They're as comfortable discussing reggaeton as hip-hop, as familiar with Latin American soccer leagues as American football. Their social networks span continents. They think nothing of having breakfast in Miami and dinner in Cartagena or Lima. For them, Miami is a city in America, is a node in a global network, a place connected to everywhere and nowhere. This global orientation extends to Miami's economy beyond real estate. The city has positioned itself as a commercial gateway to Latin America. Banks headquartered in Miami serve the entire hemisphere. Law firms specialize in international transactions. The port of Miami is one of the busiest in the country, handling cargo from throughout the Americas. Miami International Airport connects more international destinations than almost any U.S. airport. The city's economic model is based on being the place where North America and Latin America do business. And in recent years, Miami has attracted a new wave of migrants. Tech workers and entrepreneurs fleeing high taxes in California and New York. Hedge fund managers relocating from Connecticut. Cryptocurrency enthusiasts seeking friendly regulatory environments. These newcomers are drawn by Florida's lack of state income tax, by Miami's growing reputation as a tech hub, and by the lifestyle the city offers. But their arrival has accelerated already out-of-control housing costs and added new layers of tension to a city already struggling with inequality. The tech influx has created a peculiar cultural collision. Silicon Valley transplants speaking the language of disruption and innovation, landing in a city where Spanish is a lingua franca and political discourse revolves around Latin American affairs. Where the long-term residents have built a functioning bilingual society, the newcomers often arrive expecting an English-speaking American city with palm trees. The adjustment goes both ways, and not always smoothly. Yet somehow, Miami absorbs it all. The city has always been defined by waves of new arrivals, remaking it in their image. What's another wave? This adaptability, this fluid identity, this constant reinvention is perhaps the most American thing about Miami. The idea that you can come from anywhere, be anyone, and build a new life. But Miami does it with a twist. You don't have to become American in the traditional sense. You can remain stubbornly, proudly, defiantly connected to somewhere else while still participating in American prosperity. So what is Miami exactly? It's not quite Latin American, despite the language and culture. It's not quite American, despite the flag and the legal system. It's something in between, a liminal city, a threshold place where global South meets global North, where tropical meets temperate systems of commerce and culture, where the American dream is pursued in Spanish and Portuguese, where the future is both bright and waterlogged. Miami is the opposite of every other U.S. city because it never accepted the premise that immigrants should assimilate into a pre-existing American culture. Instead, immigrants arrived in such numbers and with such determination that they created their own version of what an American city could be. They build a place that reflects their origins while taking advantage of American opportunities. They made Miami into something unprecedented, a city that is culturally Latin American, economically globalized, politically complex, environmentally threatened, and stubbornly, almost defiantly optimistic about a future that may not exist. Other American cities look inward, toward their own histories and traditions. Miami looks outward, across oceans, toward countless other places that its residents still call home. Other cities are rooted in specific American narratives about industry, frontier, or innovation. Miami's narrative is about escape and reinvention, about leaving somewhere else and building something new in the only American city where you don't have to become someone else to succeed. And perhaps that's why Miami continues to grow despite all the contradictions, despite the rising seas and impossible housing costs, despite the hurricanes and the heat, despite the economic inequality and the political complexity. Because Miami offers something rare in the modern world. A place where you can be yourself and someone new at the same time. Where your language is spoken and your culture is celebrated. Where the past doesn't have to be abandoned to embrace the future. Even if that future is, literally and figuratively, underwater. Miami is what happens when immigration, capital, climate, and culture collide in a tropical swamp at the edge of America. It shouldn't work. By all conventional measures of urban success and sustainability, Miami should be impossible. But here it stands, growing, thriving, contradicting everything we think we know about American cities. A place that is deeply American precisely because it refuses to be typically American, the opposite of every other city, and utterly itself. Subscribe to Atlas Explained for more interesting videos. If you want to know about any city or country, comment your name and tell what you want to know.